Hello, I am your host, Nix, and this is Whispers and Warnings, a podcast about paranormal happenings, true crime, witchiness, and sometimes all three. While I am an enthusiast in all of these subjects, I'm not an expert on anything. I'm just a person on the internet with thoughts, opinions, and everyone's favorite search engine. Now with that, let's jump in. First off, I just want to say thank you so much to everyone who listened to the first episode and provided feedback. I'm coming into this completely green, so if you notice anything weird in an episode, please let me know so I can try and correct it for the next one. I know there were some volume issues in the first episode, so I'm hoping that I've corrected those in this one. But if you hear anything, I would love the feedback. And of course, I love hearing if you liked or you disliked the episode. Now let's get into tonight's witchy business. Tonight we're going to be talking about the history and origin of Samhain. The Celtic celebration of Samhain, pronounced Samhain or Samhain depending on the region, marks the halfway point between the fall equinox and the winter solstice and was basically considered the Celtic New Year. Samhain was celebrated over 2 or 3 nights around October 31st to November 1st, back when the Celtic people still followed the lunar calendar. It marked the end of the harvest season. All of the crops had been gathered, the animals had been brought in, and everyone was preparing for the dark months ahead. But it wasn't just a practical time, it was deeply spiritual. This was the time when people believed the veil between the living and the dead was at its thinnest point. Ancestors could visit, spirits could wander, and lots of rituals were meant to either welcome them or protect yourself from them. Bonfires were lit on hilltops to honor the gods and keep away malevolent spirits. People left offering of food and drinks outside for their ancestors, dating back to the oldest roots of what we now consider trick-or-treating. People would dress in masks or costumes to disguise and ward themselves from any wandering negative spirits. This was also a big time for divination. Things like apple bobbing, mirror scrying, and other forms of fortune-telling were common, especially about love or about the year ahead. This was your time to peek into the other world and see what messages might await. Over time, as Christianity spread through Europe, the church tried to replace pagan festivals with their own, so Samhain became intertwined with All Saints' Day and All Souls' Day, which eventually led to All Hallows' Eve, and well, you can probably guess the rest. But at its heart, Samhain was, and still is, about endings and beginnings, death and rebirth, honoring what came before and preparing for what's coming next. So if you light a candle, set out food for your ancestors, or just take a quiet evening walk this October 31st, you're connecting to something ancient, something that's been part of human life for thousands of years. For tonight's true crime case, we're going to be talking about the Halloween candy killer. Now, we all heard growing up that you should be careful eating your Halloween candy because it might be poisoned. But then as we got older, we realized that our parents weren't really checking it for danger. It was just their way of checking to make sure that they got their favorites out of the bag before you dove into it. But as it turns out, there may be some truth to that cautionary tale. Halloween night 1974, an 8-year-old boy named Timothy O'Brien excitedly went out trick-or-treating with his dad, sibling, and 2 neighborhood kids. One of the houses they approached didn't have their lights on, which is the universal sign that someone isn't home or just isn't interested in handing out candy. The kids wisely wanted to skip that home. Timothy's dad, Robert O'Brien, stayed behind. When he met up with them again, he told them that the owner of the darkened house had left out pixie sticks for the kids and handed them each one. For those that might not be familiar, pixie sticks are basically just paper straws filled with flavored sugar and sealed on both ends, and you would rip one of the ends off and just pour the powder directly into your mouth. The paper ends on the ones that Robert had given the kids had been opened and stapled shut again. When they got home, Timothy was going through his candy haul, and Robert urged him to try the pixie stick that he had in his bag. Being a small boy and not wanting to miss out on a literal mouthful of sugar, Timothy happily ate the candy. He immediately started vomiting and convulsing, and Robert later testified that he had held his son as he died. Of course, the death of a child after eating tainted Halloween candy caused a huge uproar in the neighborhood as other parents searched their kids' bags for poisoned candy. The other pixie sticks were later found. They were either in the other kids' bags or one was found unopened in the bed with one of the children. It turns out Robert was in dire straits financially. He was more than $100,000 in debt in 1974, which would be equivalent to over $800,000 today, so almost $1 million. In the months leading up to Halloween, Robert purchased $30,000 life insurance policies on each of his children. The morning of Halloween, he purchased potassium cyanide in a garden shop and laced the popular candy with the poison before giving it to each of the kids. The police eventually caught on to the cyanide purchase and the life insurance policies and charged Robert with capital murder. Despite hiring a legendary defense attorney, it only took the jury 46 minutes to find him guilty and order him to be executed. The appeals process took 7 years, but was unsuccessful. And after 2 more challenges to the lethal injection charge, Robert was put to death on March 31st, 1984, nearly a decade after the crimes. People stood outside of the penitentiary on the night of the execution shouting "trick or treat." Robert has since been dubbed the Candy Killer, or the man who killed Halloween, and his horrible actions certainly had a lasting impact on door-to-door trick-or-treating and how it was viewed. Growing up in the 90s, I know that I was always warned about the dangers that lurked in my bag of Halloween candy. And I feel like it goes without saying to you all, but there's always a way to change your life and circumstances to get out of debt that doesn't involve murder. And the fact that this little boy had his life cut so short because of his father's stupidity is just so sad. It makes me think of the family annihilator case John List, so maybe that'll be next week's episode. And what about you? Were you afraid to eat your Halloween candy growing up? Or parents, are you afraid to let your children go trick-or-treating? And for today's section of Get Spooked, we have a psychic message. Tonight's story was pretty heavy, so we're going to end on a more lighthearted ghost story. Not all communication from the other side is scary. Sometimes it can be uplifting. One day, a boy named Frank was walking the mall by himself when suddenly an older woman ran up to him, gasping for breath. She said, "I ran all the way here from the other end of the mall to find you because I sensed that you were here." Frank had never seen this woman before in his life and was understandably put off. He tried to push her away, and then she said, "I have to tell you, your brother's death was not your fault." At this, he paused. Again, he didn't know this woman, but somehow she not only knew about his brother's death, but about the guilt that he felt over it. Frank's brother was suffering from an addiction and had attempted to call Frank on the day of his death, but he didn't answer the phone. The stranger went on, "Your brother doesn't blame you." Now that she had caught her breath, her voice held compassion. Having fulfilled her duty, she turned around and disappeared back into the crowd of shoppers. Now that is all I have for you today. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider engaging with it in some way by hitting subscribe or leaving a review. And please come back for another episode next week. As always, drink your water, take your meds if you need them, and stay spooky.